Hello everyone, this is Paul Malutnock, and thanks for tuning in for chapter 18 in the book of Revelation. This is another interesting chapter. We just finished 17, which was all about how God was going to take down or destroy the one world religious system. And now in chapter 18, we're going to talk about the commerce, the political, the economic system that is going to be prevalent in the tribulation. These two chapters are going to take us back to the beginning. We're taking a respite from chapter 16, which were the bowls, and we're looking at these two chapters. John is given a vision to look at all of what's going to happen in the 7-year period. And this is all before the return of Jesus Christ, which will be in the following chapter, chapter 19. So hopefully you will understand and enjoy this chapter as we go on. It's a crucial chapter because it gives us the world conditions at the time of the final judgment of sinners when Jesus comes down to set up his kingdom. And so Satan will be in control of the universe here, but the universe which he has had once control of is starting to collapse around him. And his demons who've been occupying the heavens are now cast down to the earth, so he's focusing all his attention on the earth. And then Satan on the earth with his millions of demons is working through two key persons here, the Antichrist and the false prophet. And he's working with them to gain control of the world. In chapter Revelation 12, if you remember, Satan was sent to the earth, away from heaven. He cannot occupy heaven. He cannot whisper in the ear of God and the heavenly host to tell him how bad we are and how hypocritical we are, which he did. He then occupies himself now with a final stand on earth against God and his church on the earth. Now, we've been raptured, okay? So what's left of the people that would have been of the church are those who came to faith during the tribulation period. Now the world will be so evil that the world of rejectors become more hostile, and ultimately they blaspheme God for everything that's going on in the world. The religious system described in chapter 17 will have ceased to exist by the second half of the tribulation. At that midpoint, Antichrist will no longer tolerate the coexisting religious system, and he will destroy it. In chapter 17, we are given a picture of that religious system at the end time called Mystery Babylon. That's the name of the entire religious system. Here in chapter 18, we're getting a picture of the political economic system of the end times called Babylon the Great. The two systems share the name Babylon. They share the same satanic power. They're both associated with the kings of the earth in what is called fornication. There are marked differences between Mystery Babylon of chapter 17 and Babylon the Great of chapter 18. Religious Babylon, again, as I said, is called Mystery Babylon the Great, whereas the commercial Babylon that we're going to be talking about today is called the Great Babylon and Babylon the Great. The one symbol of a harlot woman seating upon the beast of government is for the religion. The other symbol is presented in the commerce as a mighty city. Satan will not tolerate the divided loyalties between commerce and religion other than the worship of himself or the beast. All the diverse religious ideologies then of the world will eventually come together and fall in this one religion called Mystery Babylon. And when Mystery Babylon is destroyed, Babylon will become absorbed into the commercial Babylon. It's that religion that will worship the Antichrist and the Antichrist alone. The Babylon of chapter 18, thus, is the world system of the last 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation. The Antichrist is building a world empire on a materialistic basis, economic and political. Now, this kingdom begins before those terrible judgments of the bowls start. So you could see we were in chapter 16 talking about the bowls. Now we're going back and looking at the tribulation prior to that. Babylon is worldwide. It's the capital city of the Antichrist world rule. It is then more than a city. And the vision that John has here is at the very end when the judgment eventually falls for both the religious and the economic system. So let's take a look at verses 1 and 2. It says, "After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with its glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast.'" So the Lord sends then an angel who is a glorious angel to illuminate the darkness. And you might understand what a shocking experience it's going to be when a darkened world, remember the world went dark, and sees a blazing angel coming out of heaven, bearing also from God, God's own shining glory. The statement here, Babylon is fallen, 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 is a statement of established ruin. In the form of the Greek, it reviews the results of judgment as if they had already happened. It's done. History or historical Babylon originally fell in 539 BC. That event, of course, God showed to his prophets. But this is far greater fall of greater Babylon. The fall that is the annihilation and desolation that Isaiah and Jeremiah promised. And this is the final fall of Babylon, likely occurs within the seventh bowl judgment. So verse 2, it said, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. And then here is a characterization of that city and that kingdom. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful or foul bird. Back in chapter 9, you remember the demons are released from the pit. The first part of chapter 9, then 200 million demons are released who have been bound at the Euphrates River. Demons are running amok everywhere. Then you have the demons of chapter 12 that were cast out of heaven to the earth. All of Satan's minions who are not eternally bound. Then you have the filthy spirits of chapter 16, verses 13 and 14, like frogs, spirits of demons going out to deceive the whole world and collect them to the battle of Armageddon. And the headquarters for the whole demon operation is none other than the city of Babylon. And the influence is worldwide, for it says, "For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality." The influence of this Babylon system, this commercial system that is also a worship of Antichrist, that's run by demons, that is satanic and hellish, and their influence is worldwide. They will have literally led the whole world into a materialistic intoxicant. They all want to indulge in the bed of Babylon. They all want to get involved in the luxury and the materialism and the sin of Babylon. It's going to become the wealth center of the world. It's going to seduce the entire world. We would not like to think that anything in the Arabic world would become the center of the world, but it will. They have become so enamored with the lure of Babylon, so deceived by demons, that they're kind of like a man just running for a harlot. Their passion is just out of control. And it says the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of their sensuality. The merchants of the earth are getting rich. Kings of the earth are making alliances and gaining influence. We learned that from the last chapter. The application to us, those that will be raptured, is that no matter what is happening in the world, in the end, Jesus Christ will triumph. It is to give us the confidence, this is application now, and the assurance that in the end, Christ will reign. And to let us know beyond a shadow of a doubt that in the end, no matter what goes on with Satan, what goes on with his demons, they cannot defeat Christ. Further, it's to give hope to the godly that the wretchedness and the wickedness of this fallen world will someday reach an end. Now it says in verse 1, and the end of the verse, it says the earth was illumined with his glory. The earth was made bright with his glory. And towards the end of the 3.5-year period, of course, the earth goes dark and Babylon would go dark with it. All of a sudden, verse 1, and he cried out with a loud voice. Verse 2, saying, fallen, fallen, Babylon the Great, the relief of the light of the darkness will turn to terror at the voice of doom. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It's a direct quote from Isaiah 21, verse 9. The prophet said that would happen, and here's John the apostle saying what the prophet said hasn't happened up until this time, but it will happen in the future. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. The statement is a picture, again, of established ruin. This will really culminate in the seventh bowl, the final seventh bowl, which actually occurs after the fall of Babylon, though it's mentioned earlier in chapter 16. And Babylon is remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. Every island fled away. If you remember, all the mountains were not found. God just levels the entire globe. And that's when 100-pound or close to it, hailstones come down from heaven and fall on the earth. And that's the final desolation and annihilation. So the angel pronounces this fallen, fallen, and then describes why. Well, she has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison of every unclean spirit, a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. In other words, the whole world, its entire satanic world enterprise is simply infested with demons, infested with unclean spirits. And he adds a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. That's sort of an analogy. As the prophets look at the destruction of Babylon, they saw its utter desolation. And when you look at the utter desolation in ancient times, when there was a desolation of a city, or there was a desolation in ancient times of an army, it was the carrion birds, of course, that come in and eat the flesh of the dead, the scavenger birds, to chew on the dead. And all of that he sees as sort of a symbolic thing of the demons and the unclean spirits who feed on the ignorant unbelievers who are in the kingdom of Antichrist. It's just a place of demons and unclean spirits who are devouring the bodies, just like hellish birds. It's used only here in the 19th chapter of Revelation. It's a word that is used as well to depict evil spirits hovering over the city like birds waiting to eat their prey. So the final form of the one world government will be controlled by hell itself. Hell's powerful presence will dominate, influencing and controlling people in the system of Antichrist under the direction of Satan. Let's take a look at verse 3. For all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Now, verse 3 tells us how extensive this kingdom really is. The judgment is pronounced on the whole world. The nations are connected. All the nations are linked into this. They've all drunk from the wine, the passion of her immorality. Again, this is analogous language. It's very graphic language. They're all drunk. Their passion is so great to have this that they look like they're all drunk. The whole world is a materialistic drunken stupor. They've all gotten swept up in indulging in the sins that go along with it. This is like a drunk who's given himself to every passion, to every prostitute, to every act of immorality, to do anything that's sensual. It just pictures the world seduced by Antichrist, seduced by Satan, engaging itself in a form of fornication, prostitution, drunkenness with passion. The whole world is drunken with the riches, drunk with the lust, with the luxury, with the merchandising and materialism. Now, it's not that that same stuff doesn't cause people today to be drunk. The people of this world, many of them are grabbed by the riches, by the promise of more and more. And we see this even more in those final days. It's to say this one world system of commercialism and materialism covers the entire globe. And so they drag their nations, the kings or the leaders, whatever they'd be called in that day, they drag their nations into this alliance. One world government on a global economy, probably one world currency. As we've learned a little earlier in the book of Revelation, the Antichrist controls everybody with what is described as the mark of the beast. This kind of thing could happen today because everyone is fed into electronics, into computers. And if someone controls all of those, they can in effect control everything. Not only do the kings of the earth bring all their nations into this alliance, but the merchants all join together. Those people who sell the goods. You might say that it's a unionized world in one way. And the head of the union is the Antichrist. So the whole world is engulfed in this. And we are, you can see, heading faster and faster towards this one world economy. All the alliances of all the leaders, of all the nations who keep coming together, and all the merchants who realize if they want to be successful, they've got to be tied into the global markets with their products. Everyone gets involved. Everybody is, if you will, prostituted to this satanic Antichrist world system. There's a process that leads up to this. If you're going to have a commercial system, going to have a global economy, a worldwide materialistic system, you need a lot of things to make that happen. The whole final form of the world system then is dependent on the sea, the land, the air, and the people. And that's really amazing. By the time you get to the end of the tribulation, you get to the last 3.5 years of the tribulation, all those things are starting to be devastated. And there's chaos everywhere. All those people who've been wanting these riches and wanting all these things or sell these riches, all of a sudden we've heard about the bowls and all the things that are coming down and destroying those things. So God in his judgment struck the sea, he struck the land, he struck the air, and not only that, but you have 1/3 of the people of the earth destroyed, and already 1/4 of them were destroyed in an earlier judgment. Everything that man depends upon is being devastated. And by the time you get to chapter 16 and the bowl judgments, when they come to the end, they hit the sea, land, air, they hit the people again. And, one of the things that must hold the system together is that Satan, Antichrist, and all of those hellish demons are somehow able to keep these things together, somehow able to convince people that they're still in charge, that they must find some solution somehow. The system is, of course, being hit hard, but people, instead of turning to God, stay in the system and blaspheme God, turn away from God. We live in a world today where people are putting more and more faith in their money, more and more faith in material things. But the day is going to come when Satan is going to take care of that. He's going to take over the world system. He's going to operate it with his demons, even as the world collapses around them under the judgment of God. So we say, well, are they going to know it's the judgment of God? Yes, absolutely. They will know it is God that's doing this. First of all, they're going to know it because the book of Revelation says they're going to be told. Who's going to tell them? Well, the 144,000 Jews are going to tell them. The 2 witnesses are going to tell them. The angel flying overhead with the gospel is going to tell them. And so everyone is going to know, everyone is going to see, no question there. They're going to know it's from God. Let's take a look at verse 4. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues." So, another voice from heaven, John says. The judgment of God is going to come on this morally bankrupt worldwide government, this worldwide economic system, living in arrogance, living in some form of luxury, self-indulgence. And we could see that we are on the way to doing that today. In particular, the countries that have more wealth, their people are doing that today and are thinking about that. But not everyone has to fall under that judgment. It said, I heard another voice saying, "Come out of her, my people. Those of you who belong to the Lord, get out from many areas that we just described." See, all through time of judgment and the time of tribulation, God is saving people. He's saving people out of Israel. In fact, the death of the 2 witnesses and the resurrection of the 2 witnesses, a revival breaks out, and many in Israel and Jerusalem are saved. There will be people saved, according to chapter 7, from every tongue, tribe, nation. Many will be saved. Many will be martyred for their testimony. And in the end, in this final world government, there will be God's people there. And probably their friends and family are going to try to get them to go along with what's going on in the world. But God says, get out of there. Break your alliances. Don't get caught when this wrath happens. Keep yourself pure from sin. Don't get caught up in the materialism. Don't get caught up in loving luxury. Don't get seduced by the evil system of the age. They're literally welded together as a play in the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel isn't going to reach as high as heaven. It didn't reach as high as heaven when the sins of Babylon will. And God will remember those iniquities. By his own, he says in Jeremiah 31:34, I will forgive their iniquity. I will remember their sins no more. So a worldwide economic boom will come. It will flourish. It will consume the whole world. A one world global economy built on the lust for luxury and materialism. Capitalism will reach its apex under Satan and Antichrist. It will be hammered by judgments from God. It will survive until finally God produces its doom. And that ultimate doom will come when Jesus returns to destroy what is left of the vestiges of an already destroyed world economy. Verse 5, for her sins are heaped as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Verse 5 says, for her sins have heaped up. Literally, they're welded and glued together like the Tower of Babel. They're piled up like the original ziggurats, the tower that did not reach as high as heaven. And God's remembered their iniquities. God knows every sin, every one of them. Back in chapter 16, verse 19, it said Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. His fierce wrath, the God of God's own, of us who believe. He says, I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. Jeremiah 31. That's a new covenant promise. I will remember their sins no more. But God will remember the iniquities of those who reject him. So a worldwide economic boom is going to exist at the end of the age, centered perhaps in the capital city of Babylon. Some people think it's Rome, but Babylon, more than being a city, defines a one world economy, and it's driven by greed and it drives materialism. Let's look at verses 6 through 8. It says, pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. For mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. So the third feature here, the judgment, is defined in verses 6 through 8. And, pay her back even as she has paid, and give back to her. Here's a judgment defined, pay her back. This is a call for God to judge. That's what it is. And the angels are joining the call. Earlier in the book of Revelation, the saints are calling to God to judge. Judge, O God, judge the iniquitous world, vindicate yourself. And now the angels join the call. The same angel in verse 4, the other voice from heaven who says, come out of her, says, pay her back. And now the holy angels are joining in that chorus. So this is an echo of the Old Testament law of retaliation called lex talionis, the Old Testament law of retaliation, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It was the law of retaliation. It's recorded through the Old Testament. And give her back what she's due. God, do what is just and what is fair and what is right. The psalmist often prayed for the destruction of the enemies, and the destruction of the enemies of God, and the destruction of enemies of righteousness. And though we are to be kind to our enemies, we are to love our enemies. We are never to repay evil for evil to our enemies. This does not eliminate God's final vindication of himself, his holiness, his righteousness, and his own. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Romans 12 says that. I will repay, says the Lord. We know he's going to do that. We have every right to affirm that in our prayers. Give back to her, says the voice from heaven, double according to her deeds. Literally, in the Greek, it says, double the double things. This is too late for repentance now. This is a call for the judicial justice to fall immediately. Double simply means full or complete. It is equal to full. You see that in a number of the Old Testament passages in Exodus, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Zechariah. They used double to refer to full and complete judgment. Being a judgment, punishment that is full to fit the crimes in full. Jeremiah chapter 16 verse 18 says, "And I will first doubly pay their iniquity and their sin, because they have polluted my land. They have filled my inheritance with carcasses of their detestable idols, with their abominations." As the Lord gives double measure of blessing, so he gives double measure of wrath. And sinners, according to Romans 2:5, are storing up wrath against the day of wrath. They're just accumulating and accumulating, and until the righteous judgment of God breaks forth in this double fury. Verse 7 adds, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning. For she says, speaking of Babylon again in her heart, I sit as queen, I am not a widow, I will never see mourning. To the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to that degree she will be given punishment. She glorified herself by saying, I'm a queen and I'm not a widow. Self-sufficient, invincibility, and all that. And that's what people say in their hearts. I'm invincible. Proudly, lustfully, they pursue all personal fulfillment, given over to self-exaltation and self-promotion, lusting for every sensual desire, very arrogant, and in a royal place. Not a widow. That is, I'm not going to see suffering. I'm not going to be weeping. I'm not going to be weak. And so that's what that says. And in one day, it doesn't necessarily mean 24-hour period. It means in one great moment. Eschatological history. In one final explosion, rapid fire judgment will fall. Think of the bowl judgments as saucers, and what's poured out doesn't come out slowly. It is dumped out. Daniel 5 says that the Babylon of old fell literally in one day. Sudden destruction will come. And the end of verse 10, emphasizing the fast character of this, the suddenness. At the end of verse 10, in 1 hour your judgment has come. And verse 9 said, and the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. Now, the bulk of the chapter starts in verse 9 and gives us a definition of the nature of this final world economy. And this is the judgment lamented, and there are 3 groups that are involved in this lament, as we will see. Now, I'm going to close here in part 1 of this chapter 18, and we will take up the rest of this chapter next time. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.